Okay, so now we're we're at slide 41. This is a nice diagram, with a correlate of a slide preparation, which is nice. Which then takes us to the respiratory zone structures. The respiratory zone begins where the terminal bronchioles feed into respiratory bronchioles, which then lead to the ducts and the alveolar ducts and sacs or saccules. The alveolar sacs contain clusters of alveoli. You'll hear them referred to as grape-like structures responsible for respiration, external respiration. So when you see the phrase grape-like, you'll know we're talking about the alveoli, the clusters of alveoli. There's about 300 million alveoli make up most of the lung volume. That's a lot of them. Okay. Which takes us to the respiratory membrane, the blood-air barrier that consists of alveolar and capillary walls, along with the fused basement membranes. It's very thin, as it should be, right? So that it can have gas exchange by simple diffusion. The alveolar walls have a single layer of squamous epithelium, which is a flat, if you recall, single layer of flat cells, type 1 alveolar cells. And then there's scattered cuboidal cells as well. Cuboidals are shaped like cubes, right? The alveolar type 2 alveolar cells that secrete surfactant, as well as antimicrobial proteins. So surfactant is something that prevents, it thins out the mucus and prevents it from being too clumpy or thick. Now, this is a great diagrammic view of what actually happens in the capillary alveoli relationship. So if you see right here, you have the alveolar sacs, and wrapped around it are going to be the capillaries. And so as soon as the diffusion occurs, it goes back and forth between the blood and the air, as you can see. Other significant features of alveoli is going to be it's surrounded by fine elastic fibers and pulmonary capillaries. You've got the alveolar pores that connect the adjacent alveoli, so it's kind of makes a alveolar syncytium, if you will, just from last chapter, because you guys are used to that word. Alveolar, they equalize the air pressure throughout the lung, and it provides alternate routes in case there's scarring or blockages, and so that you don't sacrifice the air that's coming in. Alveolar macrophages, macro means large, phages means to swallow. These are large eaters, the cells. It keeps the alveolar surfaces sterile. So 2 million dead macrophages per hour are carried by cilia to the throat and then swallowed. If you think about it, that's a lot of cells per hour that's constantly, turning over to ensure that everything in your alveoli are indeed sterile because the walls are so thin. Okay. So this is a cutaway of the inside of an alveolus. So you have the red cell in the capillary there, and then you have the alveolar cells in green. These are the ones that secrete the surfactant. The type 1 alveolar cells are the squamous ones, and then there's the alveolar pores that connect one alveolus to another. That's nice. So, gross anatomy of the lungs, very important, right? Lungs occupy all of the thoracic cavity except for the mediastinum, where the heart is, as we recall. The root is a site of vascular and bronchial attachment to the mediastinum, right? The costal surface, so the root is more medially placed, right? So the costal surface is more anterior, lateral, and posterior surfaces of that touch the ribs. Apex is the superior tip, and the base is the inferior surface. Please, at this time, please remember that the root and the base are different. This seems to be trouble for a lot of students that I've had in the past. And make sure that you know when you have a pyramid, right, that you have the apex and the base. The apex and the base, instead of the heart going this way, the lungs actually are shaped indeed like pyramids. The hilum, this is found on the mediastinal surface. It's the site of the entry and exit of blood vessels. It's where all the tubes come in. Left lung is, before we move on. Entry, exit of blood vessels, bronchi, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. And I want to make sure that I don't skip over anything on this particular one because it'll allow me to go faster during our class. Okay, so left lung and the right lung. So the first left lung is separated into superior and inferior lobes by the oblique fissure. Please be mindful of these words. So you have the superior and inferior lobes. Left lung has 2 lobes, right lung has 3. So the left lung is smaller than the right because of the position of the heart. There is a notch or a divot. There's a concavity called the cardiac notch, and that's where the heart fits in, and the lungs accommodate for where the heart fits. Right lung is separated into superior, middle, and inferior lobes. So superior, middle, and inferior lobes. Superior and middle lobes are separated by the horizontal fissure. The middle and inferior lobes are separated by the oblique fissure. These fissures are, in fact, important. I love computers, don't you? They're the best. Okay. This we talked about this picture already. How we like this one. I like this one. This is important. You have the intercostal muscles, the rib, the parietal pleura, the pleural cavity, and the visceral pleura. So remember in the heart, we talked about pericardium and the pericardial space. This is the whole thing about when something that is non-moving is encasing something that is moving, that's going to cause friction. And so whenever there are, potentially friction causing surfaces, we make sure that there is a space, and the moving part has a membrane, the non-moving part has a membrane that protects it, and then there's a space in between to mitigate the friction piece. In the lung case, you're gonna get instead of pericardium, it's going to be called pleura. So the parietal and visceral is the same. The parietal pleura then is the membrane that lines the cavity itself. Then the visceral pleura, viscera means organ. So this is the membrane that lines the organ. And in between there is the pleural cavity or the pleural space. As you can guess, it's filled with serous fluid. Please be mindful of all of these wonderful, potential points that I can be giving you, right? So we've got the trachea, the thymus is you can't see that. Okay, here, that organ right there, and you have the apex and the base. The base is actually the surface that's sitting on the diaphragm. As you can see here, you can see the heart in the mediastinal area and the different fissures. If you can see the horizontal fissure, the superior, the middle, and inferior lobe, as well as the oblique fissure, you know that you're on the which lung? Right lung, correct, because the right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2, and you can see the superior and inferior lobes on that side, as well as the oblique fissure. This is actually highlighting the cardiac notch. This is a very great, pretty, basic but comprehensive. It's pretty hefty, a nice diagram here. Okay, so this is the mediastinal surface. Obviously, you've got the pulmonary artery and veins, as well as the left main bronchus. You've got the cardiac impression, as far as and as well as the hilum as being this area. My thoughts are about actual photographs as opposed to diagrams. It's very hard to get a clear picture for it to be fair on a test. Please do know this picture though. And we might actually get a diagrammatic, clearer picture of this. The information is important, but it won't be, if I were to give you a test, it won't be that exact picture. Okay. This is a good one as well. This is a transverse section through the thorax. You can see all of the different, tubes that go in and out. Again, take a look at this one. You can actually, this is important. This is interesting because you can see the pericardial membranes as well as the pleural membranes on this one. And you can see the, the bronchi and the arteries and veins all there. You can see the esophagus in the mediastinal area. You can see all of them. Here you can see the aortic semilunar valve. So this is how come you can know which vessel is which one. Okay. Each lobe is further divided into bronchopulmonary segments. There's 10 on the right and 8 to 10 on the left, separated by connective tissue, septa, plural for septum. Each segment is served by its own artery, vein, and bronchus. If one segment is diseased, it can be individually removed, which is really, really great because it allows kind of the ability to sequester and the rest of the organ to still move forward. Lobules are the smallest subdivisions visible to the naked eye. They're hexagonal, 6-sided segments served by bronchioles and their branches. Lungs are mostly composed of alveoli. The rest consists of stroma, elastic connective tissue that makes lungs very elastic and spongy. I don't know if you've actually felt in a cadaver lab before, but they are indeed very, very spongy. Sorry. Here, this is the image of just the bronchi, the bronchial tree. It actually looks like a tree, and the fact that the segments are using different colors is really fantastic up here. The left superior lobe has 4 segments, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the left inferior lobe as well has. Why is this doing that? Has 5 segments, and then that's the left lung for you. The right superior lobe has 3 segments, the right middle lobe has 2, and the right inferior lobe has 5. Lungs are perfused by 2 circulations. The pulmonary circulation, the pulmonary arteries, of course, deliver systemic venous blood from the heart to the lungs for oxygenation, as you know. They branch profusely to feed the pulmonary capillary networks. They do. The pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood from the respiratory zones back to the heart. It is, like all veins, low pressure, high volume system. Lung capillary endothelium contains many enzymes that act on different substances in the blood. So this is very important. How much we regulate the flow into the lungs is very important. For example, and so a lot of hormones and a lot of, chemical messengers are used to, and pathways are utilized to begin to, make sure that certain vessels are tightening or loosening to ensure proper flow. For example, angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, activates blood pressures. So angiotensin converting enzyme is the enzyme that converts angiotensinogen to angiotensin. Angio means blood vessel, right? And tensin is something that provides tension or squeezes, right? And so when you have an increased squeezing, it increases the pressure, obviously, of that vessel. So one class of blood pressure medication is it's called an ACE inhibitor. If you think about angiotensin enzyme, converting enzyme spells ACE, so it's also called ACE. So an ACE inhibitor is a lot of the medications that end in pril, like lisinopril, enalapril, and things and medications of that nature. Okay. Bronchial circulation. Now you have the bronchial arteries that provide oxygenated blood to the lung tissue as well, arise from the aorta and enter the lungs at the hilum. Part of is the systemic circulation. So this one is a high pressure, low volume, supply all the lung tissue except the alveoli. The bronchial veins anastomose, meaning connect to the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins carry most of the blood back to the heart. So now we're feeding with there's two systems. So there's the pulmonary arteries that send blood to the lungs to get oxygenated, and then there's the bronchial circulation, the bronchial arteries that actually provide oxygenated blood to the lung tissue itself. Oh, why is this happening? Innervation of the lungs. Lungs are innervated by parasympathetic and sympathetic motor fibers, as well as visceral sensory fibers. Nerves enter through the pulmonary plexus on the lung root, and they run along the bronchial tubes and the blood vessels. Quick note, nerve arteries and veins usually run together, because it's like building a freeway system that works perfectly, right? You don't build another brand new freeway system. You add lanes, right? If you have a system that's perfect, that's already in existence. Parasympathetic fibers cause bronchoconstriction, whereas sympathetic fibers cause bronchodilation. If you recall, you have sympathetic nervous system has to do with fight or flight, right? Parasympathetic has to do with rest and digest. So when you are in fight or flight mode, you're going to have bronchodilation. You're going to need it so that you get maximum amount of air coming in, and so you get maximum oxygen perfusion to the lungs, and so all of your muscles can get access to it. Pleura, we know that the thin double-layer serosal membrane, we talked about it, divides the thoracic cavity into two pleural compartments and the mediastinum. So you talked about the parietal pleura. It's the one that actually covers or lines the cavity, and the visceral pleura is the membrane on the external lung surface, which means that it covers the organ itself. And in between the parietal and visceral layers are going to be the pleural space, right, between the two pleura. And it provides lubrication, surface tension that assists in the expansion and recoil of the lungs. Same picture again, blank slide. Okay, and we'll go on to mechanics of breathing on the next one.